welcome to the deep dive. You're here because, well, you want to get straight to the important stuff, right, without feeling bogged down. Today we're diving into something pretty fascinating where AI meets medicine, specifically how doctors figure out what's wrong. We're looking at a new AI system that can actually talk to you to help with diagnosis.
Exactly. We're unpacking research on a system called AMI that stands for Articulate Medical Intelligence Explorer. And our mission here for this deep dive is to pull out the key findings from the paper about it. You know, how it works, how they tested it, what the results really mean. There's some surprises in here.
Definitely some aha moments,
Sure.
possibly. And our guide is a research paper towards conversational diagnostic artificial intelligence.
So let's jump in.
Okay.
Okay, first off, the paper really grounds us in the basics, that doctor-patient conversation. It's fundamental, isn't it? More than just chatting. Oh, absolutely. It's the core of diagnosis. They actually mention a stat that something like 60 to 80% of diagnoses might come just from the history taking, just listening, which really makes you think, about the potential here for AI. If an AI could get really good at that conversational part, that could be huge for access, maybe even quality of care.
Huge potential. Right, so let's talk about AMI itself. What is it? What's the tech behind it?
So AMIE is based on a large language model, an LLM. You've probably heard about LLMs. They're behind a lot of the advanced AI text generation we see. Think of it like a really, really sophisticated version of your phone's predictive text, but trained specifically on medical knowledge and, crucially, medical dialogues. What makes AMI special is that tuning. It's optimized for these diagnostic conversations.
Okay, optimized. But how do you teach an AI to have a conversation like a doctor? That sounds incredibly complex.
Yeah, the method is pretty clever. They use something called self-play. Imagine setting up a simulation, a virtual world. In this world, AIE gets to practice having these medical chats over and over again across tons of different diseases, specialties, scenarios. And the really smart part, it gets automated feedback. So there's an AI patient and another AI acting as a critic.
So it's learning from its own simulated mistakes without a human needing to check every single interaction.
Pretty much. It's like AI tutoring AI. They talk about two loops, an inner loop where AIME talks to the AI patient and gets judged by the AI critic. Then an outer loop takes the best dialogues from that inner loop and uses them to refine AIME even further. It's this constant cycle. Practice, feedback, improve, repeat.
Okay, that makes sense. A continuous learning process. But talking is one thing. How does it actually figure out the diagnosis? What's going on inside the AI's head, so to speak?
Good question. They built in what they call a chain of reasoning strategy.
Right.
This happens when AMI is actually doing a consultation inference time, they call it.
Yeah.
So instead of just, spitting out a diagnosis, AMI internally goes through steps. It looks at the conversation, summarizes the key points, lists possible conditions, figures out what information is still missing, that sort of thing. And the step-by-step approach seems to really boost its accuracy and just make the conversation better overall.
Right, a more structured thought process. Okay, so we've got this AI trained through simulation using chain of reasoning. Sounds impressive on paper, but the big question is, does it actually work? How did they test it rigorously?
Yes, the evaluation. They did a randomized double-blind crossover study, which is pretty much the gold standard for minimizing bias in this kind of research. They put AMI head-to-head with actual primary care physicians, PCPs, real doctors.
Okay, head to head. How did they standardize the patient part of it?
They used trained actors, basically playing the role of patients. These actors had text-based chats with both AMIE and the human doctors. The setup was very similar to something called OSCE's Objective Structured Clinical Examinations. These are standardized tests used in medical training where actors portray patients. So it adds a layer of realism and structure to the comparison. And they used 159 different clinical scenarios based on cases from Canada, the UK, and India. So quite a range.
159 scenarios, actors as patients, and how many human doctors were involved?
There were 20 PCPs in the comparison group. And importantly, everyone used the same text chat interface. Then, after each interaction, both specialist doctors and the patient actors rated the performance.
Rated them on what exactly? What were they looking for?
A whole range of things. How well they gathered the patient's history, the diagnostic accuracy, of course, the management plan they suggested, but also communication skills, even empathy. They really tried to capture the key dimensions of a good consultation.
Okay, the setup sounds solid. So, the moment of truth. What were the big results? What did they find when they compared AMU and the PCPs?
Well, this is the headline grabber.
Yep.
In this specific simulated setting, AI actually showed greater diagnostic accuracy than the human primary care physicians.
Wow, okay, greater accuracy. That's significant.
It really is. When the specialist physicians reviewed everything, they rated AMI higher on 30 out of 32 different measures, and the patient actors, they preferred AIM on 25 out of 26 criteria. So across the board, AMI scored remarkably well in this setup.
But hang on, you mentioned it was all text-based chat. That's not typical for doctors, is it? Especially not for remote care. Usually it's phone or video.
Exactly. And the researchers are very upfront about this. They highlight it as a major limitation. This text chat format isn't how most PCPs normally do remote consultations. So that unfamiliarity could definitely have impacted the human doctor's performance. We need to be cautious about generalizing too much from just this.
Right, context is key. So let's unpack that diagnostic accuracy finding a bit more. How did they measure correct?
They use something called top accuracy. Basically, they looked at the list of diagnoses provided, say, the top 5 or top 10 most likely ones. Top accuracy measures if the actual correct diagnosis was included within that top K list. Yeah. And AMIE consistently had significantly higher top accuracy for all the different K values they checked. Statistically significant, meaning unlikely to be just chance.
So AMI was better not just at getting the single top answer right, but also at including the right answer somewhere in its differential list.
That's right. And another interesting point, the human PCPs didn't always give, say, 10 diagnoses. Their average was about 5. AME, being an AI, consistently generated a fuller list.
Which, just statistically, might increase its odds of hitting the right one in the list, potentially.
That's a fair point to consider. They also look separately at scenarios where the patient didn't actually have a disease, maybe just needed reassurance. There are only 10 of those, but AME seemed to do better there too, though it wasn't statistically significant because the sample size was small. But on the 149 cases where there was a disease, AMI accuracy advantage was clear.
Did it vary by medical specialty? Was AMI better at, say, cardiology than dermatology?
Yes, they broke that down. AMI matched or did better than the PCPs in all the specialties except one, obstetrics and gynecology urology. The biggest gains for AME were seen in respiratory medicine and internal medicine.
Interesting. Wonder why those specifically. What about the different locations, Canada, UK, India? Did that matter?
They did see slightly higher accuracy overall in the Canadian lab setting for both groups, but the difference wasn't statistically significant. And when they compared performance on 40 scenarios that were used in both Canada and India, the performance was pretty much equivalent. So geography didn't seem to be a major driver of the relative performance difference between AMI and the PCPs.
Okay, so accuracy is one thing. What about efficiency? How quickly and effectively did AME gather the information needed for the diagnosis compared to the humans?
Efficiency is crucial. They found AMEs tended to be a bit more verbose, use more words in its turns. But interestingly, the total number of turns in the conversation and the amount of information elicited from the patient, those were actually quite similar between AME and the PCPs. It suggests they were both getting roughly the same amount of data from the patient, even if AME used more words to do it.
So not necessarily faster or slower at getting the core info.
Seems not. They did a truncation analysis, too. They looked at accuracy based only on the first, say, 10 turns of the conversation. That showed both AME and the PCPs seemed to get the most crucial info fairly early on. No big difference in the speed of information gathering itself.
Okay, but then there was that other analysis, the really intriguing one, where they gave AME the transcripts from the human-doctor consultations. Tell us about that.
Yes, this part is fascinating. So they fed AME the text records of the conversations the human doctors had with the patient actors. And AME's diagnostic accuracy using those transcripts was basically the same as when it used its own transcripts. And crucially, its accuracy based on the human doctor's transcripts was still better than the diagnoses the human doctors themselves made from those same conversations.
Wow. Okay, hold on. So given the exact same information gathered by a human, AME was still better at figuring out the diagnosis.
That's what the results strongly suggest. It points towards AMI's main advantage potentially being interpreting the information, rather than just gathering it slightly differently. Processing the symptoms and history more effectively, perhaps.
That is a really key insight. It's about what you do with the information. Okay, let's shift gears to the softer side for conversation, quality, empathy, communication. How did AME stack up there?
This is another area with quite surprising results. The patient actors. They rated AI significantly better on almost everything. 25 out of 26 different communication and empathy measures. Things like making them feel at ease, listening, explaining things clearly, showing empathy, building trust. AMI scored higher. The only one with no difference was acknowledging mistakes, apparently because mistakes weren't common in either group.
Wait, the AI was rated as more empathetic and made people feel more at ease than the human doctors, at least in this text chat.
According to the patient actors in this study, yes. It really challenges that idea of AI being inherently cold or impersonal. How that feeling was generated via text is another question, but the rating stands.
That's quite something. What about the specialist doctors who review the chats? What did they think of the communication quality?
They largely agreed. The specialists rated AME's responses significantly better on 30 out of 32 quality metrics. They actually preferred AME's overall consultations, its diagnoses, and its management plans compared to the PCPs. The only two areas without a significant difference were about recommending escalation to specialists and whether the AI made things up confabulation, which was rare for both.
So specialists and patients both preferred AMI's interactions in this text format. Did they also check if the AI's self-assessment matched?
They did. They used an automated system to rate the quality of the simulated dialogues AMI had during training, and those automated scores lined up pretty well with what the human specialist thought. It also showed that the dialogue quality improved after that interloop self-play training.
Okay, the results sound really positive for AMI, but we touched on limitations. Let's revisit those. What are the big caveats we need to remember?
Number one, absolutely, is the text chat interface. We can't stress that enough. It's not typical clinical practice for PCPs, and the study wasn't meant to perfectly mirror standard telemedicine.
And that text format might play differently for AI versus humans, right?
For sure. Text is AIE's native environment. It allows for long, structured, detailed replies. For human doctors, it lacks the nuance of voice tone, pauses, body language they might rely on, even in a video call. The researchers themselves floated the idea that AME's longer, more detailed text responses might have been interpreted as more empathetic by the raters, even if it's not empathy in the human sense.
That's a crucial distinction. Perceived empathy via text isn't the same as genuine human connection.
Exactly. And the researchers really framed this not as AI replacing doctors, but more about potential collaboration. How can we combine human skills, real empathy, complex judgment with AI strengths, like systematically processing data?
Right. What about limitations related to the simulated nature of the encounters?
Yet, simulations, even good ones, aren't real life. They can't capture the full spectrum of patient diversity, emotional states, communication styles. They noted AMIE has struggled a bit more with simulated patients who had lower English literacy. Also, most scenarios assumed the patient had some underlying disease. Real primary care involves a lot of ruling things out, which wasn't the main focus here.
So simulations are useful for testing, but still a controlled environment?
Definitely. And the researchers are clear. Much more research is needed before something like AMIE could be deployed safely and effectively in the real world. More studies on different conditions, diverse patient populations, different ways of interacting, not just text, plus all the safety, ethics, privacy considerations.
Understood. There's also the issue of fairness and bias, right? AI can sometimes pick up biases from its training data.
A huge issue. They acknowledge this study couldn't fully capture fairness or bias. That's a critical open question. There's a risk AI could replicate historical biases present in medical conversations, but also maybe an opportunity to design systems to be more inclusive, though that requires careful work involving diverse groups. They mention the need for things like participatory design and model red teaming to specifically look for and address these bias issues.
And things like robustness across different languages, handling uncertainty, lots still to figure out.
Absolutely. Safety, reliability, keeping the AI's knowledge up to date. The list of requirements for real-world use is long and complex.
Okay, so let's bring this deep dive to a close. What's the essential takeaway message about AME?
I think the main point is that AME shows a really significant step forward for conversational AI in the medical diagnosis space. In this specific, controlled, text-based simulation, it performed remarkably well, even outperforming experienced doctors on diagnostic accuracy and perceived conversation quality.
But, and it's a big but, we absolutely have to keep the study's limitations in mind, especially that text chat format.
Couldn't agree more. Interpret with caution, remember the context.
So here's a final thought for everyone listening. As we wrap up, consider the future role this kind of AI might play. Maybe not replacing doctors, but perhaps augmenting them, becoming a tool to potentially boost their abilities, maybe help manage workload, or even extend expertise to more places. What ethical questions, what practical challenges does this research raise for you? How do you see this technology evolving and potentially reshaping healthcare down the line? It's definitely something to think about. AMI gives us a really interesting, maybe even provocative look at what could be coming. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.